If you think about it, there are only two types of people in the world. There are people who know that Ben-Hur is the greatest novel of all time, and there are those that are wrong. That's it. Two categories. You fall into one or the other. Either you agree with me or you're wrong. So, I will tell you, I love to read. It's my favorite hobby. I read pretty much anything I can get my hands on. But there are two things that I read every single year. One is the New Testament. The other is Ben-Hur. Sometimes I read them more than once a year, but at a minimum, I always read those two things at least one time per year. Now, anytime someone asks me what my favorite book is, I always say Ben-Hur. And very rarely do people ask why, but just this week, someone asked me, well, why? And so I put my thoughts onto writing, and now you're going to get the video. So here's the reason. If you don't know, the full title is Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ. So as a Christian, of course, I'm already going to tell you that it's the greatest novel of all time for that reason. So this is a story about a Jew who has multiple interactions with Jesus throughout the course of his life. And he's struggling with who Jesus is and what his opinion of Jesus is throughout the entire novel. So yes, it is a story about vengeance. It's a story about resilience. It's a story about overcoming adversity. Yes, it has a love story mixed in there. Yes, it talks about the topics of pain and suffering and forgiveness. But its primary focus is on the person and deity of Jesus Christ. The man who wrote the story is just as fascinating as the story itself. So the author is Lew Wallace. Lew Wallace was born in 1827, and he served in the Mexican-American War. He also served in the American Civil War, and during the Civil War, he was promoted to Major General at the age of 34, being the youngest Major General in the Union Army. In addition, he also received a military commission to be part of the investigation for the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. So his life story itself is super fascinating, and you can read some of his experiences in regards to war and politics and diplomacy in the novel of Ben-Hur. So Ben-Hur, the book, was published in 1880, and by 1900, it was the best-selling American novel in the 19th century. It surpassed, at the time, Uncle Tom's Cabin that had the #1 spot. Interestingly enough, though, if you look today, you won't find, typically, Ben-Hur on a top 100 novels list of all time. That's probably, in my opinion, which is worth about half a penny, is because America has fallen away from Christianity. And so because this novel covers the concept of who is Jesus Christ, it won't appear on a top 100 list with all the other classics that it's actually sold more copies than. Again, very interesting. Again, that's just my opinion. I don't have anything to back that up aside from what I think about it. So if you disagree with me in regards to why Ben-Hur is not on a top 100 list today, let me know in the comments below. If you disagree with me that it is the greatest novel of all time, I'd love to hear your opinion, but I am going to disagree with you because you're wrong. All right, so what's really fascinating, though, about Lew Wallace is that at the time of the writing of Ben-Hur, he wasn't a Christian. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from Lew Wallace's autobiography. It is 2 volumes, but here's an excerpt he says from page 308. Lew Wallace says, "At the time, speaking candidly, I was not in the least influenced by religious sentiment. I had no convictions about God or Christ. I neither believed nor disbelieved in them. The preachers had made no impression upon me. My reading covered nearly every other subject. Indifference is the word most perfectly descriptive of my feelings, respecting the tomorrow of death, as the French scientist had happily termed the succession of life. Yet, when the work was fairly begun, I found myself writing reverently and frequently with awe." Lew Wallace concludes on page 314 with this statement. "As this article is in the nature of confessions, here is one which the reader may excuse, and at the same time accept as a fitting conclusion. Long before I was through with my book, I became a believer in God and Christ." So this man set out to write the story of Ben-Hur, at the time not being a Christian. But before he ever finished the novel, he had come to the conclusion of who Jesus is. And it's a question that all of us have to answer. Jesus was a historical figure. So the question becomes, what do you think about his life and who he is? We all have to answer that. If you want a summary of my opinion of who Jesus is, watch this video right here. It's an animated description of who Jesus is. Now, the book itself, Ben-Hur, is fascinating because it's Ben-Hur's struggle with who Jesus is. Ben-Hur, throughout the course of the book, again, has his own story of vengeance. But within that, he keeps interacting with Jesus Christ. And his opinion of who Jesus is changes throughout the story of the book. But what's really fascinating is that this novel isn't just Ben-Hur, the fictional character's struggle with who Jesus is. It's actually Lew Wallace's struggle in regards to who Jesus is. And so you can read that in the text. It's so fascinating to me that you get to see that. It's also fascinating to me as a history major because Lew Wallace has tons of experience, again, serving in multiple wars, doing government positions, government jobs in the course of his life, and you can hear all of that in the story itself. You can hear the experience and the rich history. I mean, he studied Jerusalem, he studied the Jewish faith, he studied the Christian faith, he studied the first century church while writing Ben-Hur, and you can see all of that. So as a history major, it's super fascinating. So I think Ben-Hur is the greatest novel of all time, but I also think Lew Wallace is the greatest author of all time. And if you don't believe me, one of the things I'll tell you is I firmly believe you can tell a lot about the character of a man based on what their spouse thinks of them. So I'm going to read you something that Lew Wallace's spouse wrote after he passed away. So her name's Susan, and Susan wrote these words. "The love of my life is gone. I am now 76 years old, and my heart is a tired hourglass. It seems hardly worthwhile to watch the slow dropping of the sands. The past is ever present with me, and though I look through all the faces in the world, I shall never see another like that of my first, last, and only love." That's a powerful statement. Maybe one day my wife will say that about me. And I think you can see a lot about the character of Lew Wallace in those words. So although Lew Wallace is no longer with us on earth, his work is a masterpiece that has had a tremendous impact in the world and is still one of the greatest novels of all time. If you haven't read it, Christian or non-Christian, I encourage you to read this book. All glory to God, friends. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.